Hello and welcome to Inside the Avatar Studio. Inside the Avatar Studio brings together innovative leaders from the virtual technology frontier to discuss their perceptions, perspectives, and predictions of what being virtual means in today's society. I'm your host, Kevin Feenan, and with me today is Mel Burns-Ryder. Mel Burns first came to Second Life to explore the possibilities of expanding his internet work into the 3D web, and became fascinated with the social and cultural aspects of its thriving communities. His professional experience includes software training and producing mixed media, therefore a natural transition to become one of the most foremost prestigious news sources for Second Life in virtual worlds. Mel, thank you very much for being on the program here.
Well, thank you, Felon. Good to be on the other side of the production crew, so the camera, so to speak, for once.
I was about to say, we got the whole thank you for being on the program, but you're always on the program.
Yeah, I'm lurking in the background, aren't I? Sort of, but a lovely introduction. Thank you for that.
Oh well,
sure I don't deserve it, but.
Oh no! Bevan said this is what I had to do, so we have to go with what Bevan says.
Fair enough.
There's so many different aspects in terms of what you've been doing over the past. Oh my goodness! I mean, as long as I've known you, anyway. So I mean, that's been a good 5, almost 6 years now. But I guess one of the first questions I really sort of want to ask you is, are there any portions of this thing we call the internet pie that you don't have your fingers stuck into?
That's a good question. There must be. I mean, I'm stuck in the news feeds, I'm stuck in the social networks, and I'm stuck in the Metaverse platforms. But I mean, just take the number of open sim grids and stuff that are parts of the Metaverse now. I mean, I can't possibly have an avatar and a login for every single one of them. I tend to stick to a Second Life and be the hypergrid. I mean, you go where you need to be, really, and it's a bit the same with news. I mean, I aggregate stuff. I have my ways of posting stuff, sorting through my feeds, getting what I want, but it's something that changes all the while. So I might be using a service or something a year ago, which I don't even touch now, because it no longer fulfills its function, so to speak. On the other hand, there's obvious things like Twitter, which I've been using since it was in beta, and which I still use all the while, as you know. So,
well, I find it quite fascinating because there's very few people that I can look to who have who appear to have their finger on the pulse of what's going on inside these virtual spaces. And, certainly I don't know how you do it, because I know there's no way I could possibly keep on top of all of what's going on, never mind the amount of time that you put into, just with regards to the Twitter feed alone, the news articles that come across that you and then in turn sort of filter and send out to the rest of us. How do you find that process? I mean, to me, that seems like a fairly complicated process. I mean, that's a huge undertaking.
The undertaking sort of is, in a way, but I mean, it's not actually as hard as you might think. It's more a matter of routines. I've been aggregating news since more on the political, so progressive politics side for much longer. And my interest in the Metaverse awoke, shall we say. So I've always had these sort of systems for doing things, bookmarklets, robots, you code a little robot button in a browser that does all the dirty work for you. And sometimes you have to work a while on setting up things, but once they're set up, hopefully, I just make it as easy as possible. I'm very good. I'm a nosy bastard, really. I mean, I have to read everything, and when I say read everything, that itself is a bit of a lie. I mean, what I do is I scan things. I've got an overview. And I enjoy scanning a lot of things. You know, I go through hundreds and hundreds of fashionista blogs every day, for example. Now, there's no way I'm reading all those. I don't even look at half the pictures, but I am scanning and getting a feel of what's going on. And when I'm in the rhythm of that, for want of a better phrase, then I find it very easy to spot what's important. It does stand out in the flow of the river, as it were, and it's the same with other feeds, for example, which are more technical or to do with the hypergrid and things like that. Then those I pay a lot more attention to. But again, I don't repeat a second news item that is basically repeating one I posted a couple of hours earlier. So it's really a matter of just spotting what is important. And if it's important to me, I clearly read it and absorb the information. Other times I can tell something's important, but I don't necessarily read the whole thing. For example, Rockcliffe might announce an event. And there might be a long blog post on it, and I will know enough to say, oh, well, that's a worthwhile event. I will tweet its existence, but I may not well read the whole blog, you know, over and beyond the date and time. So, you know, there are tricks to this. I mean, I think what I do that other people sort of find daunting is that I just have maybe a talent for absorbing news, scanning it and seeing what's important, and having the buttons in place, as it were, in my browser or on the iPad to literally tweet something or send it to Scoop or send it to Facebook or send it to Digoo. I do post all over the place, really, and I tend to post serious metaverse stuff to Twitter as Mal Burns, and then Second Life stuff I post to Twitter as Mal Burns Writer on a separate account. So I sort of divide these things. I've got a whole load of links at a place called Digoo, which have nothing to do with the metaverse whatsoever. So I do divide up the places where I actually send the material, mostly to stop spamming people. You know, if people are following me on Twitter because they're interested in the metaverse, I don't want to shovel all my other stuff onto the readers of that particular feed. So I create a different feed for that. But all in all, I mean, it takes up a lot of time, but I would be reading this stuff anyway. So, you know, it's not as hard as you might think.
So, my apologies, 1 second. So between you and the bad tooth and me, my throat, we're going to do really well today.
Yes.
Over the years, obviously, there's some major trends that you've been blogging about and talking about, and certainly on the Metaverse in Review, and then, you know, through Grumpy's and other avenues that you have, where you sort of don't just do like put out the raw content, but also provide some sort of analysis around it. What have you found has been some of the more salient things that you've been finding over the last 3 or 4 years in terms of where we've been coming from?
Oh, good grief. Well, the list is endless, really, isn't it? I mean, in terms of Second Life, incidentally, where we're filming this, obviously, I'm approaching my 5th Res Day, so it feels like I've been here a lot longer, but it will shortly be 5 years on this platform, anyway. And in that, and you know, Second Life, although I consider it only part of a greater metaverse, is by far the biggest sort of public platform, and you know, it's the place where you have to put the showroom even if you don't put the factory. It's a vast social platform and everything else, and you know, in that small period of time, it's very easy to forget just how much Linden Labs, who runs Second Life alone amongst the metaverse, have actually achieved. I mean, in my time here, we have seen voice come in. We saw an overhauled viewer, and now another overhauled viewer. Maybe we shouldn't be talking about that one. Also, we've recently had Mesh come in. We had, I suppose, Sculpties come in. I can't even remember half the things that have happened. I mean, the biggest change I remember, the first big change I remember was voice. But clearly, the platform, has advanced since then. I think how shall I put this? I do view Second Life, where we are now, for example, very differently from the way I did 5 years ago. It was the first fully immersive environment I'd experienced, of its ilk. And obviously, when I first came here, I was just fiddling about a bit. It takes a couple of months just to sort of, ingratiate yourself in the platform, so to speak. You run around like a little kid, finding everything you can do, and then when you found everything else, you sort of settle down and start doing something a bit more worthy. But so much has happened. I don't know whether it's partly to do with the fact that when I came in, there were lots of people coming in at the same time. But I don't know, Mitch Wagner was in at the same time, Nick Wilson, who used to do Metaverse. I think even Robert from Metanomics was a part of the original group. The whole group of us who had been sort of Twittering, and we came in about the time I came in, and we had these regular sort of Twitter meetups in World. And I think there's similar things happening now, but, there was obviously a group of us at that time and at that place. Now, some of those people have now moved on to other things completely unrelated to Metaverse. Others have moved on to more specialized platforms because, say, they're involved exclusively with commerce, or they're exclusively tech, whatever. So that little community I started off with has obviously fragmented, and there's a lot of change going on. For example, when I look up things happening in Second Life at the moment, there is so much going on. I hardly know where to start. Yet at the same time, all the old things that used to be on my regular list have sort of moved on themselves. They're either not happening or they're happening somewhere else. So I tend to view Second Life, and like the other Metaverse platforms now, as somewhere to sort of jump into when I want the presence, when I want to attend something, be it a talk with you like this, or whether it's listening to some music or visiting an art gallery. I tend to go in to do those things. I mean, I normally log in at least once a day just to check the mail and sort out the office and stuff like that. But I certainly don't spend the degree of time that I used to in here. And I think part of that too is the fact that I know the interface. I know my way around. I know what I'm doing. So there's no learning curve left when it comes to jumping in and attending something, as obviously somebody who's never done it before gets. So I think the more we become familiar and at ease with these kind of platforms, then the more our attitude to them changes, or certainly it has done in my case. I mean, I know there are people who 5 years in will still be in here 24 hours a day if they can, but I certainly have interest. I still have to use the 2D web to pursue things and stuff. So, but I like aggregating and bringing it all together, and I also like broadcasting, of course. So that's sort of a separate sort of line, but that's another avenue for what I consider to be promoting these platforms and what their the capabilities are.
Right, you're just talking about this idea of, and we've heard this from others where they've said, you come into an environment like Second Life or OpenSim or one of the other metaverses that are out there, and there's a learning curve. So you spend a fair bit of time, going through that, and after a while you become at ease with the environment, and after a period of time, it's sort of, you're not quite as spending as much time in here as you said, what you used to early on. And I certainly know it's the same for myself and other people. Do you think there's more to that than just simply being at ease with the platform? I mean, is there the how do I put this? The initial promise of virtual environments and having a second life, so to speak.
Yeah.
Has that sort of morphed on people, or is this just something that you find typically happens as people go from platform to platform to platform?
Well, I don't really, I can only speak for myself, really. I mean, obviously different people have different degrees of immersion and, I won't say addiction, but, some people, if all you're interested in is having an avatar and having a house and dressing up in lots of costumes and going shopping, you could do it as a full-time, and do nothing else. My interests are such that, well, I won't say there's really any limits to it, but I mean, forget that Second Life is a platform, a place to exist for a minute, and just think of it as a piece of software. Something like Adobe Photoshop, which I used to teach way back when, version 3, I think it was out when I stopped. I just have a way with those things. I actually tend to be self-taught. I would get a piece of software. I'd fiddle extensively with it until I thought I knew it inside out. Then I would walk away from the software and I would read the manual, because I found it much easier to read the manual when I'd already exhausted the visual delights, as it were. Reading a manual blind or while I'm looking at the screen, I found distracting and awkward. So I would tend to get a rough idea or good idea of what the thing was about. Then I'd go away somewhere quiet, away from the screen, read the manual. Then I would come back and finesse the skills. And there comes a point where, you carry on teaching the same routine week after week. But in terms of wanting to get anything done in the program, it would take me 5 minutes to do what once upon a time would have been a very complex job. And it was simply the fact that I knew the program inside out, or at least I would hopefully did. And, every piece of software, to a lesser or greater degree, is like that. And I think, bearing in mind that Second Life is software at the end of the day, you just don't expect to go in somewhere without that, undertaking that learning curve. I think once you've got the expertise, you know what you're doing, then you make a decision of whether you just come back to it whenever you need it, or whether you stay with it, to the point of, hang out here all the while, I guess. These things are a kind of personal decision. But I mean, something that has obviously attracted me is the progress of OpenSim and things like that. I mean, I have an estate, with my partner Tara, who's in the audience, on Reaction Grid, for example, and I visit a load of other grids if things are happening, using. Sorry, my mind's gone blank. The hypergrid, just jump to a hypergate or something, and so. When I come into Second Life, I usually expect to just pop in. I'll arrive at my home location, then I'll hit a TP to the destination I want to go to, if it's for an event or something like this. I'll arrive there and then do it, and then I'm off. It's a nice quick process, no travel time involved or anything else like that, an hour is an hour kind of thing. And I've extended that to open simulators too. I mean, there are platforms like Avination and InWorlds and a couple of others I won't mention, that seem to be emulating Second Life as a walled garden. But most of them, and I think the future at any rate, lies in the hypergrid, where just as I can TP from place to place in Second Life, on the hypergrid I can TP from grid to grid as well as from place to place. And I am not really interested in exploring all these different places. My main aim is to have one avatar, and that avatar is hypergrid enabled and can go to wherever I need to be. And there's a simplicity in that. You don't want to have 1,000 different avatar names, 1,000 different passwords, or even a grid that wants double passwords. I seek the easy route, as it were. I'm prepared to put the work into setting it up for myself, but once I set it up, I like it easy. Sorry, am I going off topic here?
No, there is no such thing as off topic on this, on what we do here. It's interesting though, because I mean, what you're talking about in terms of this ease of use really isn't quite there just yet. I mean, the hypergridding, for the most part, is still limited to being inside certain data center domains, like very physical networks. Or at least my understanding of it is, and so I mean their reaction grid, for example, has a few hundred different white label grids that they provision, and you can hypergrid between each of those. But if you wanted to go from there to in-worlds, you can't. As far as I know, you can't do that yet.
Well, I think you're actually wrong. You're right in the sense you can't go to in-worlds, but the reason you can't go to in-worlds is because, like Second Life, it is a walled garden. It is structured that way. But I mean, I can easily hypergrid from, say, Reaction Grid to something like aggregator grid, which is hosted by Reaction Grid. But equally, I can hypergrid over to Franco Grid, which is totally independent. It's the French grid, which is on servers in France. You simply jump from server to server, just like you do in Second Life. When you change locations in Second Life, if you teleport, you're actually jumping from one server to another server, which is where the sim is you're going. And the hypergrid is actually pretty similar to that. You're simply jumping to a grid location and then to a landmark location. And you're quite right in saying you can't hypergrid to in-worlds any more than you can hypergrid to Second Life. But there's in-worlds, there's Avanation, there's and there are a couple that are like that. They deliberately think the walled garden and the firewall is the thing that is attractive. But most education, most academic, scientific builds on the open sims tend to be hypergrid enabled. They want you to just pop over there. And my good friend Fleep Took, who runs Chillbo here in Second Life, which I'm part of, and we did have Chillbo on Reaction Grid, that's now gone, has quite literally set up her own Fleep Grid, which runs as a small server from one of her home computers. So actually, there's no overheads involved except for a normal internet connection, and I can actually hypergrid from Reaction Grid straight into her personal server and be on Fleet Grid, which is all hosted on. I think it's an old Pentium 4 she's got.
Yeah, so she was. Go ahead.
Yeah. I see. This. I see getting simpler and simpler. I mean, just in the last year, the protocols and things to be able to do all this have been getting slicker and much easier to use. And of course, Pathfinder Lester, who used to be a Linden, is sort of running what he calls it a hypergrid adventurers club, which is just dedicated to sort of thrashing out this sort of traveling around everywhere. And there is something over there which is the kind of pioneering spirit that I think was still just about around when I joined Second Life. I obviously wasn't in the first wave of Second Lifers, but it's that pioneering spirit has certainly moved out of Second Life onto other grids, I think.
Has it really moved though, or has it in fact become fragmented as well?
Well, there's a lot of specialization. Somewhere like Franco Grid is, of course, focused on French people, and it's a sort of kind of national grid platform. On the other hand, you have Craft Grid, which is almost especially dedicated to craftsmen who want to build and create things. In Worlds, which isn't on a hypergrid, is very much a sort of it's the closest thing to Second Life as a independence of Second Life. It's a social grid. There's lots of clothes. There's lots of shopping. There's all that real consumer focus. So long as these grids are connected together, I don't think the fragmentation, as you might call it, is too important. It's actually quite helpful to have a speciality grid. If I'm sitting in my house in reaction grid and I think, hang on, I want to know about space technology or something, then it would be quite helpful to actually teleport over to a grid. I know it's a science grid. It might be NASA or something like that, which is devoted to the subject I want to find out more about. It's almost a way of you treat each grid as a specialized destination. I think there's space for everything, really.
So let me ask a little bit of a loaded question then, because we've obviously talked, and you've heard me ramble on occasion about Linden Labs sort of giving up their competitive advantage in terms of things that they've been doing, but in listening to what you're saying, I'm sort of getting the impression that to a certain extent this might not really have been a bad thing in terms of the lab giving up that competitive position, right? In that it has forced people to explore other options. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing the same thing through.
I'm not at all sure that the lab quite knows what it's doing.
Well, it's not as if it was it's not as if it was a conscious decision, right?
Yeah, I a lot of people, around Linden Labs say, that they have this magic thing, but none of them fully understand what it is, what Philip unleashed when he made it. Clearly, we've passed the visionary era where Philip, the founder, was CEO and sort of the spiritual guidance, as it were. Then we've moved into an attempt to, hit the business markets and the more serious markets in the Mark Kingdon era. And now we're in an era which seems to be coming back, much more back to the social aspects of it and even the gaming aspects of it. Where it would go in future, I'm really not sure. But you remember that the open sims tend to operate on a branch code from what Linden Labs have, and obviously Linden Labs, being a major company, are spending a lot of money on updating their viewer all the while. I actually want to see an independent Metaverse viewer. I'm fed up of seeing about several trillion versions of the Second Life viewer. I'd rather actually have a Metaverse viewer that strips out all the Second Life stuff and then plugs them in as necessary. But I think Linden Lab in Second Life here still have the major public platform. It has a huge social user base. The only one really that competes with that is probably in Worlds. It has a lot going for it, just by way of legacy. It's got education, but it's also got music, it's got art and whatever. And now it's introduced Mesh. There's a new trend, and that is that the creators in Second Life are having to rely on Outworld creating tools a lot more and then bring them in-world. And this is something that OpenSim has always offered, the idea that you can create something, on Reaction Grid, you can then export it and you can import it into Second Life, and it's clearly your ownership because you imported it in the first place. And, you don't have to worry about not being able to export it because you created it on another platform and you've got a copy there that you can export anyway. So there are real drawbacks to working in Second Life. If I made this chair I'm sitting in, and it has nothing to do with copy transfer, the fact is I cannot get it out of Second Life even if I wanted to. Whereas if I create the same chair on Reaction Grid or any open sim, then I can save it, and what's more, I can import it when it's finished and ready for sale or whatever I'm going to do with it, and bring it into Second Life. So Second Life has really become, as far as the metaverse is concerned, to me, the showroom of the metaverse. It's the high street. Just like I can go out in the organic world, just go down the block, turn into the high street, and I've got the stalls there, and I've got the showrooms there, and I've got local government there. I've got all the things you expect to find in halls and shops and stuff like that in the high street. And the shops, when I pass them, have got window displays. They are showrooms for products, and they are there to sell you products. But you don't walk down the high street and expect to see the insides of a factory or a research lab or something like that. There may be one there with its entrance hidden away somewhere down an alley. But, that is not the purpose of the high street, really. And it's clearly no longer the purpose of Second Life. People who want to run factories and want to create heavily and control rights and stuff like that they're going to do it outside Second Life. But Second Life is still important because it is the place you bring everything in to sell it, because its economy is bigger. It is the biggest platform, so there's more people potentially walking down the high street to see your product, if you see what I mean. And, musicians will still come here because it commands the biggest audience. Although, of course, audiences are limited by SIM capacity and everything anyway. There's lots of ins and outs of this, but, it's just that public space, that sort of new pavilion that Second Life represents that I think is the key to its success and longevity, and where it will continue to go. I think we'll just see a lot more of the industrial aspect of the metaverse shifting outside Second Life, even though it may connect back in by way of importing goods, or if the hypergrid becomes big, there'll be a point in time where Second Life will say, well, we'll allow people to teleport in or teleport out, but not both. Or, they'll probably eventually come to, this sort of agreement, when common standards develop, usually everybody wants to plug into everybody else. In much the same way the Twitter and the Facebooks of this world all plug into each other and interconnect, even though they started independently.
Right. As part of this, you mentioned a couple of different things that I thought was kind of interesting. One was this aspect of the nature of the platform seems to be evolving a little bit more and is going a little bit more towards the social and the gaming side of things. However, in order to do gaming, right, and we were actually just sort of not exactly, we were talking more about machinima, but before we actually started the program here, we were talking about the complexities involved in having the back-end infrastructure available in order to do things that are more complicated than what is necessarily available off the shelf. So things to introduce more of the gaming aspect to what it is that we're doing, whether it's OpenSim or whether it's here, I don't quite see the toolkits being available just yet, although Linden Lab is talking about making the toolkit for Linden Realms available at some point over the next year. Right? I mean, are you
Now, I mean, I am not in any way a traditional gamer. I did actually, back in the 90s, oddly enough, I had one of the Philips CDI machines, which was it's actually the first time I ever got on the web was through my television set, oddly enough. You basically put a CD in and it could run a web browser, or you could get games. And I remember getting Seventh Guest, I think it was called, and Myst. I love Myst, because they weren't so traditional games. They were kind of explore things, a bit like wandering around Second Life, exploring nice builds. But I'm not a traditional gamer. Give me a shoot 'em up and I'm dead in the first panel, and that's that. However many times I try. So, but games are very useful. I mean, some people say life is a game. Board games like Monopoly and things like that have always been very popular. Even people who still watch TV often watch game shows because of, they like second guess the questions or something like that. So everybody is games things to some extent, even if we don't call ourselves gamers. And as you know, of course, I mean, games can be very useful in education. They you can present something as a game where its purpose is to actually educate. Or more to the point, you can have educational things that are just pure fun anyway. For example, in Second Life here, I can TP over to a build of ancient Rome. Now, one of those builds would probably be somebody's fantasy of what ancient Rome was, but equally another one could be built by somebody who really passionately wants to recreate ancient Rome virtually. And it doesn't matter to me whether that is role play or not. I take it seriously depending on how seriously it's been constructed. I mean, to go to a sim that is a faithful replica of ancient Rome, and if they insist you put on a toga and behave like a Roman and do the role play thing, I've no objection to that, because although I'm not into role play, that is actually part of the historical education, to immerse yourself in the environment that you're being educated about, if you see what I mean. So there's so much overlap in these things. I can't just say, oh, I'm anti-role play, I'm not into all that, because inevitably it's rubbish. Just by changing your costume, you're into role play to some extent. So, the things that Lyndon Wells have introduced, they're just really a few technical things at the moment. If a lot of that was given out to general users to create with, I could foresee a few problems at the moment. For example, automatic loading HUDs and things that do things automatically could be abused. So clearly, before they deploy that to anyone and everyone, they've got to sort of make sure it's not going to cause more trouble than it's worth. But I think these things will probably end up having other uses, to be honest. I mean, Second Life is not a game, but there's plenty of games in it. And there are, when I first came in here, I used to blog and do a video Twitter thing with Nick Wilson, in fact. And my speciality was like heads-up displays and tools. Every week I was saying, oh, I found these new tools. And it was almost from a newbie approach. I found this wonderful thing called Misty Tool. It does this, this, and this, and the list will be endless. But a lot of those heads-up displays that we can pick up in Second Life now that do really useful things for us were originally developed for in-world games. So although what they've become has nothing to do with gaming, it's really important that, the gamers have that freedom to develop stuff, because they ended up pioneering the use of things like HUDs.
Do you ever see the lab potentially opening up the opportunity to have API plug and play aspects in here?
It's so hard to tell. I mean, as we've seen with the new viewers, Viewer 3 or whatever it's called now, they've gone off on their own kind of tangent, and they've certainly introduced a lot of nice things, but there's no sort of modular, really true modular side to it. You look at a lot of successful software like Macromedia software and Adobe software. It's always had plugins, and the community that it develops the plugins becomes a major promotional part of the software itself. In Second Life at the moment, everything is in world, and because of the way it's built and structured, it's very hard to imagine them. I think I'm not a techie, but I've got a feeling they will have to backtrack an awful long way to rebuild something that will be modular and allow for plugins. I'm sure there'll be some ways of doing this. For example, I think the little tabs that you get on the buttons on the sidebar, I think it's fairly easy to program new tabs, so people could develop tabs in the same way that they've developed HUDs. But we'll have to see where it goes. They obviously their own viewer development is a closed ship, so to speak. I mean, they take on board these contributions they get given or reject them in some cases. But it's, anything that's contributed really is sort of along the lines of the way the viewer is sort of going anyway. So there must be limits as to what you can, sort of come up with that will plug into their existing system. But it may change. You can also get round a lot of things. One thing I like about Second Life and indeed the Open Sims is that you can use things like media on a prim to introduce other elements. Now you can't really do it yet, for example, but take Reaction Grid. They also have a platform called Jibe, which is based on Unity 3D and works on the web. And I actually downloaded the Android version of it and actually have it on a TV set, a TV box powered by Android, so I can use this Air Mouse to literally go into the Jibe platform and wander around. But equally, in theory, I could do the same thing by putting Jibe on the prim. If it works on the web, it's going to work on a web prim in Second Life. So you can create a wall that is that other type of world, and you can walk from Second Life, not literally, but you can create the illusion of walking from Second Life into a wall that is another world on another platform. And increasingly, I had a long discussion with somebody about this quite recently. It may have been on Crossworlds, but the way that a lot of people expected the immersive nature of virtual worlds, immersive spaces, to take off a lot quicker than it has. We expected people to start using it for meetings instead of wasting petroleum and money and time on aircraft flying. We saw it as a sort of ecological savior, as it were. And it's sad in many ways, but people have gravitated to mobile technology. Instead of using technology to stop burning up petrol and stuff like that, they continue as always, but they've adopted mobile technology that goes with them. And certainly for the next few years, I think, the pad computers, the Androids and the iPad are really taking over. They can deliver perfectly good, video quality, interactive stuff, and they are just so easy to move around with, as we know from phones. And I think that's a market that has to be addressed if you're trying to communicate with people. But I think, personally, that, one of the things I like about Second Life, and even more about places like Reaction Grid, is they actually provide somewhere for me to slow down. If you're wandering around with these mobile devices, your social network's firing up and down all over the place, you don't get a chance to relax, and you don't often get a chance to sit down and really focus on what you might get at a meeting or in a classroom or at a concert or whatever. Whereas when you come into the virtual world and go to an event, whether it's a talk, a discussion, whether you're partaking or just listening, or it's music or art, you do have to slow down. It's a bit like becoming back to the real world. The pace at which you do things in the immersive environment is really quite slow compared with the web. Sure, you can teleport pretty damn quickly. That's a good way of travel, I've got to admit. But, when it comes to being at a venue and doing something, you're doing it much more in real time at a measured pace. And I think people need that. I think we're going to see in the next few years a kind of burnout with the Facebook kind of thing. I'm not saying Facebook will collapse, but, it is too demanding of people. How many information streams can you take in? How can you sort it all out in your head and still feel like you're not sort of overwhelmed by it? And, people find ways, like I was saying earlier with my newsfeeds, we find ways to manage it. But even so, there is a limit to how far it can go. And you've only got to look at, say, disabled people, people working at home, people who don't have the mobility and things like that in the world, to see that the desktop and the environments, like metaverse environments, are vitally important to these people. Whereas, at the moment, there is still an absurd, use of travel and burning up resources and stuff like that, which we really have to overcome before these platforms will really ultimately be seen as the useful things they are going to be in the future. I'm rambling on a lot here, aren't I?
No, that's believe me, that's quite all right. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you've been talking about here that I'd love to pick up on. Certainly, my apologies. We had some wild thing is talking about 10,000 years in Second Life is 1 year in real life.
Yeah.
But I mean, this whole yeah, but it's interesting because I mean, this whole concept is of information overload and people. I mean, it just seems to me, and I don't know if you've noticed the same thing through the aggregation of all these things that you've been reading about over the years, but it seems to me every time that there's a new social network that comes out, everybody's rushing to go say, oh, what's this new social network all about? And, whether it's, Fifth Avenue or whatever that thing Bevan's into lately, or, a number of other different environments like this. I mean, do we get to the point where we have to slow down?
Well, I think so. It's something I've been thinking about that quite a lot recently. Actually, I tend to think, what can I cull in the activity that won't make much of a difference? Just to ease off a bit, because whatever you do, really, there's something more coming along all the while, and you can't take aboard everything without dropping a few things behind you. The social networks thing, I think, is a bit crazy. I mean, I'm a bit of a sucker for this too, not as a user, but I join everything going. But I am, unlike, I suspect, most people, I don't use half of them. I really join them so they're there if I need them. And I sort of know I've got them available if they prove useful. And if something looks like it could be useful, I mean, the example at the moment is a thing called Pinterest that came online very recently, which seems to be overtaking Flickr as a way of storing and commenting on images. And I think that will go somewhere, but I'm making very little use of it at the moment. I've got my end in there, so to speak, and I'm connected to it, and I'll send the old thing there. But I will wait to see how useful it is, before I use it more fully. This is just me, because I think, only 1 in 10 of all these new things coming online will actually turn out to be useful or live for a very long while. And I've had a lot of aggravation, I suppose, from online services. I mean, forgetting ISPs that don't deliver what they say and everything else. We all talk about using the cloud. I mean, to me, the internet is the cloud. I mean, it's data, and it's live on the web. It's scattered around different servers everywhere around the world. That is what I call the cloud anyway. But, people are now talking about the cloud because of its use for storing files and running applications from and stuff. But, what happens when it goes? I don't think Google's going anywhere, so I rely on it quite a lot. But I will, for example, find a video collecting service, and, I'll collect sort of videos and embed codes and stick them on this service. And, just when I'm thinking of, right, well, how long has it been going? Oh, yes, this is working quite well. Right, I'll integrate that into my website, or sort of tell people to go and look at these playlists or something. And just as you do it, they decide to go. they get taken over or changed or go bankrupt or whatever. So we really even things like Facebook, we are at the mercy of these enterprises. It doesn't really matter whether they're a big corporation and we're worried about our data and privacy, or whether they're a small fair that we sort of trust implicitly. The fact that they are remote services means that we can be scuppered at any moment, if they go down. So this is another reason I'm not too happy about the longevity you're asking about of the networks. I mean, the Googles and the Facebooks are big, and it's very hard to see them crumbling unless something completely disruptive comes along to oust them. But at the back of my head all the while, I keep thinking, well, this is a service that's there online. I could wake up in the morning and it could be gone. It's one of the fun things about yesterday in a way was how many it's the SOPA protest, but how many sites either changed themselves or just disappeared for that short period of time, and it made you think, well, hey, hang on, today's not right. It's not working right, even though some people carried on as normal. So anything that's online, I mean, is in terms of empowerment for the human race, being online and having instantaneous communications, and what used to contain the promise of democracy, at least, is wonderful. That is a wonderful advance. But at the same time, because it's virtual, you've got to worry about its sustainability. People who live almost entirely in Second Life, they can be leading very useful lives. But what happens if the plugs get pulled? If the American legislation that comes through, this sort of SOPA and the other thing they're talking about, it would affect being able to use media on the prim in Second Life. So it could, even though Second Life might still be here, its whole, half of its functionality may disappear. So you never know from one second to another, whether this is really stable. So I think it's only healthy to assume the worst, if you see what I mean, but being optimistic at the same time. If that makes any sense at all.
No, to me it makes total sense, because I've actually blogged about this very subject myself in terms of the this concept of legacy, and how in the quote unquote, and I know everybody now hates the term real world, right? Real life, but when you're out here, when you're away from the computer, the things that you do out here have some form of permanence associated with them. And yet everything that we do within a virtual world only has permanence insofar as whoever is paying the bill for the technology at the end of the day. Right, and the easiest example that I can point to is something like WorldCom, because I mean here you've got a multi-billion-dollar corporation with telecommunications into every continent on the world, and within 5 years they effectively disappeared from the face of the planet. Right.
Well, look at look at today. Finally, they officially announced Kodak have gone bankrupt.
Yeah, I just heard that
just a few hours ago. I mean, that company is 150 years old, and actually, I taught for them at one point, and in the early days of digital photography, they were in the lead. So it's not just purely not caught up with the modern age, but these things are fragile. It just takes a wrong turning somewhere, and a monolith like that can just disappear. Mm-hmm. But I was, I think there's a balance here. I mean, one of the biggest criticisms I've heard of Second Life is that, and actually this has come from former Lindens when we've been talking about the hypergrid and stuff too, is who ever heard of a piece of software where you can't back up your work? Well, I'm afraid Second Life, you can't.
Well, that's called Windows.
Don't even talk about them. But no, I mean, you can say, right, well, we have our virtual things that we do online, and we have my name for it is the organic self, the organic world, which organic, atomic, whatever. Physical things you can back up there, but I'm used to, I would say create something, be it in, Photoshop, of course, will be offline, but, I'd be used to creating something. Say I create a spreadsheet in Google Docs, and it's a lot of work, and it contains some very valuable data. Then I back it up onto my local disk. So if Google vanished overnight, the work I did using Google's platform is I still have a copy, and I still have the value. But, in places like Second Life, and increasingly with a lot of cloud services, you don't necessarily get all that stuff. Flickr, for example, takes all the rights in anything you ever post to Flickr. People don't question this. They're so anxious to use Flickr, they just press the button saying, yeah, I agree to all that, whatever it is. And they post their stuff to Flickr, but it becomes owned by Flickr when, in the small print, the moment you post it there. You can actually download stuff from Flickr, but if you actually go to a web page and try and download a picture from there, it doesn't let you. You have to be devious about it or use special programs. I think automatic backing up of work you do, assets you have virtually is absolutely vital. If they need, if they're other people's assets, like if the clothing I'm wearing, this avatar is wearing now, is created by somebody else, then fair enough. I should be able to back it up and wear it wherever I want to wear it. I shouldn't be able to copy it, but that's simply a matter of putting some copy prohibiting code in the asset itself. I better not even go into what the giant Hollywood companies are up to at the moment. But my opinion basically is, if you don't like what's happening to stuff you put on the web, don't put it on the bloody web in the first place. It's like an artist. They can't moan about a low resolution JPEG being ripped off, because the reason they put it there is to get exposure for their work. If they are silly enough to put a high resolution copy of their work on the web that is good enough for somebody to print off as a high resolution print, then that's their lookout. They should, but a lot of people who are moaning left, right, and centre about all this stuff just don't understand how it works, and they just think they have some divine right to say, oh well, we've got to control this. Anyway, I'm not going to go. I better not wander off into that territory, and I think we're nearing the hour.
I think we are. So I'm going to ask the infamous wrap up question here. If you had a crystal ball, what do you think the impacts of virtual worlds will be on society 5 to 10 years into the future?
Wow.
And you can't claim that you didn't know about this one because you've heard it 300 times so far.
Yeah, but I've temporarily forgotten. Actually, I on Crossworlds, which is a similar talk program I do where I host, I think I end with much the same question, or greatest fears, really. I think it's just a very difficult one to answer because, if you'd asked me this question just a few years ago, I'd probably have said, oh well, we'd have more uptake of meeting spaces and people using these places to meet. Your local book club may not meet here because they're just down the road organically. But if it's a specialty book club and you have to travel a long way to meet your friends in the Yellow Flowers Manual Book Club, something rather specific there, I think, then it makes much more sense that you would meet in somewhere like Second Life, and that's just on a simple level. Whether clearly the necessary changes society needs to make in the organic world to protect our environment and conserve fossil fuels and stuff like that are not being implemented at the speed they should be just for the survival of the planet. So the anticipation of what the potential of virtual worlds has, I can't fairly say, I expect that to be happening in 10 years now, because I've realized people are very slow to take up this sort of thing. Also, a lot of people find it frightening, which amazes me, but it is true. A lot of people, they look at it and they would come into somewhere like here and they will make the leap to realize that the cartoon is more than a cartoon, and they will hear people speaking and then suddenly realize they're amongst real people, and they will actually freak out. Instead of embracing it, they'll run a mile, as if they've taken the wrong drug or something. There isn't an uphill thing. I think, in that 5 to 10 year period, we will see growth, and we'll see alternatives. And I think we'll see a lot more compatibility via the web. I much prefer the idea of a virtual world where you enter a place and access the web and other services from. But other people take the other approach. They say because the web is so ubiquitous, then the web should be the first stop, if only the window that takes you into the world. So I think, when I refer to the web, I've got to refer to apps on mobile devices, most of which are sourcing web content anyway. I think we'll probably see more developments there for the interim period, at least in the next few years.
Cool. Very good. Well, Mel, thank you very much. That's all the time we have available for the broadcast show today.
It always is.
It always is, yeah. Hey, we're doing not too bad. We're only a minute over this time. I'd like to invite you to stay for an after-show wrap-up. It's been wonderful having you on the show, and we're looking forward to good things to come.
Indeed we are. Always keep our chin up, so to speak.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's it from the Rockcliffe Rotunda. Join us. Actually, I have to check with Bevan when we're going to be back. It will be in approximately about 3 weeks. But Inside the Avatar Studio is produced by Bevan Whitfield and Rockcliffe University Consortium. Technical production by Robustus Hacks, and our guest today, Mel Burns, in association with Metaverse TV.